We are live
Woo!
with Amber Thomas out in Seattle.
Mhm.
She is a marine biologist turned data scientist, and she recently wrote a data visualization article that was quite popular. It got picked up by Mashable. It got picked up by a ton of foreign press, and it was about a very controversial topic, but she did an excellent job of visualizing it and really driving home a lot of the considerations and a lot of the things that basically she used data visualization to drive home a very important point. And I'll let Amber tell us what that point is.
Sure. So I decided I wanted to look at the difference between dialogue that females have in movies and males have in movies. So I did a very small sample. I wanted to just look at the top 10 highest grossing films from last year. So that included, movies like Captain America: Civil War and Rogue One, which is, was a really hot button topic because people were kind of mad that there was a second Star Wars movie with a female protagonist. And I saw that movie and really just didn't feel like there were a lot of women that were actually represented other than Jin, who is the main character. So I decided to do a data science sort of little dive into the dialogue for those top 10 movies and just see, was I correct? Were there actually females equally represented in those movies? And so I did the project and visualized it and wrote it up. And like you said, it's gotten a lot of traction, which is really cool.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about your findings. The article, by the way, is in the description of this. So if you want to click through and take a look at the data visual, and I also link directly to the data visualization that Amber built. But tell us a little bit, just in brief, about the findings.
Great. So ultimately what happened is none of the top 10 movies from last year had an equal number of female speaking characters. So I looked at any character who said even one word, and I tried to categorize their gender based on the pronouns that were used or the actor's IMDb page and things like that. And all of the descriptions of my methodology are in that article as well. But yeah, ultimately there wasn't gender equality in any of those top 10 movies for a number of characters. And when it comes to dialogue, Finding Dory is the only movie that had more than 50% female dialogue, or even at 50%. All of the others had way below 50% female dialogue, or at least below, which was kind of surprising.
So you talked a little bit about your methodology for collecting that. Basically, did you watched all of these movies?
I have seen all of them now. What I basically did is I tried looking online for transcripts. So people who had already gone through and watched the movie and typed up all of the dialogue that happened throughout the movie. For some of them, I was able to find it with the character attribution. So this character said this, and then this character said this, which made my job really easy because then I just had to feed the text file into a program and figure out how many words each character said. Other movies weren't quite as easy. I had to use things like closed captions and things like that, which had all of the dialogue but didn't have which character said what. So for those movies, I did have to manually go through and watch the movie and attribute each set of words to the character that said them. So it was a labor of love, I guess.
So tell us a little bit about the software that you use to actually do the calculations.
Sure. So I used a program called R. It's free and open source, and if you haven't used it, it's really great, specifically for statistical analysis, which is mostly what it's for. But it's a base software, and then you can download specific packages for your needs. For this project, I really didn't need any specific software or any specific packages for R because I was just doing simple text parsing, which was really good practice for my regular expression skills, which are, not awesome, but I had to tell it basically to go and look for things like sets of characters in between spaces. So it was good.
So you're feeding these big files in, and you're basically just going through and using regular expressions to parse like full scripts of movies, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and then I was able to join all of the data by character, so I just had like a word count for every character and then went through and assigned gender to each character as well.
So that's the data collection part, but the really exciting and really interesting part I thought was the actual data visualizations you built.
Mhm.
How did you build those?
So I used D3 or Data-Driven Documents JavaScript library for that, which was actually unique for me because I had never used D3 before. Most of my visualizations I had always made in R because R has the capability to make those visualizations. But I ran into a couple issues in that I wanted something really specific for these visualizations. I wanted basically bubbles, each one representing a character, sized based on the number of words that the character said, and then sort of grouped together. And I was having a really hard time doing that in R and having the level of detail that I really wanted for this. And so I did some research and found that D3 made that possible. So I started looking at tutorials and other just examples of things that people have already done. And I looked at their script, and it was kind of trial and error, honestly, figuring out what all of the pieces did and figuring out how to make that work for my information.
So what's the name of the type of visualization that you chose to use to represent the dialogue?
I think it's called a bubble chart. So it's just a grouping of bubbles. Sometimes when you hear bubble chart, you imagine it being on an XY axis, which I did actually try for these data, was putting kind of like a scatter plot of different circles that were sized based on the number of words that were spoken. And I tried putting them on an XY axis. But what happened is the characters that had a lot of words were way off in the corner. And then all of the minor characters were like bundled down in the other corner, and you really couldn't tell the difference between those minor characters. So I wanted to get rid of the XY axis. So if you look at the visualization, you see this grouping of bubbles that's just sort of in like a circle.
And one of the things I really like about your visualization is it's interactive. You can click the button and it'll separate out the male character's dialogue from the female character dialogue.
Yeah.
Was that tricky at all to set up with D3, or was that pretty?
Once I knew how to do it, it was really easy. That again was kind of one of those things that I decided I wanted my visualization to look a certain way and to behave a certain way before I had any idea how to actually make that happen. So once I knew what I wanted it to do, it was a matter of going through and figuring out how to actually make it split. And I had seen other visualizations made in D3 with bubble charts where the bubbles could be separated. So I knew it was possible. So it was just a matter of figuring out how to do it, which actually wasn't terribly hard. I had some issues with the bubbles like running into each other and overlapping and never stopped shaking, which was kind of entertaining, but eventually I got it.
So how much JavaScript did you have to learn for this?
You know, I think the visualization that came out of it was a good baseline for me. But I definitely have spent some time after finishing it going back and brushing up on the basics of JavaScript because, like I said, I'd never touched JavaScript before this. And I've had a couple people go and look at the script that generates those visualizations and be like, this is not totally optimized. And I'm like, I know, I'm working on it. Like it's a work in progress. So I'm still learning.
Do you plan to use D3 and R, that combination of statistical analysis and visualization for future projects?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually really enjoyed D3, and even though it took some getting used to, and like I said, I had some weird errors where bubbles were shooting across my screen and stuff, it was really great, and I love the interactive element. And you can get that a little bit with certain packages in R, but I liked being able to have something that was totally personalized and customizable. So I will be using D3 more.
Let's talk a little bit about how you stumbled upon this project. You mentioned, were you proactively looking for something to create a visualization for, or what's the story?
You know, normally when I do like personal projects like this, yes, I am normally looking for like something that I want to do. And usually I make my personal projects revolve around some new skill that I'm trying to learn. So it might seem like this one I went into, you know, trying to learn D3, but this project actually for me was really different in that I didn't plan to do this project originally. The reason I started it is because I saw Rogue One in theaters and I was really excited about going to see the newest Star Wars movie. I grew up with Star Wars and I like the films, and I was excited to see another female protagonist. And then I kind of left feeling like I could name all of the female characters. And so I started having this conversation with friends about if they noticed the same thing or if I was crazy and there actually were more females and I just didn't notice. And so I decided to stop just guessing and asking people what their perception of the movie was and just to actually put numbers to it. And so I decided to look at that movie, but then that seems weird just to look at only one movie. So I expanded it to 10 and chose the top 10 highest grossing films from last year.
At what point did you realize, like, wow, this is probably a whole lot of work?
The first couple of movies that I started working on were actually the ones that had all of the character and like dialogue information like set up really nicely. So I was like, this is going to be so easy. And then the last several were the ones that I had to like find closed caption data and like go through the movie manually and do it all. So I kind of realized it was going to be a lot of work after I was maybe like 30% of the way through the data collection. But at that point I was too excited to stop. So I just kept going.
Well, you collected a lot of data in your previous career.
Mm-hmm.
Before, you were a biologist, a marine biologist.
Mm-hmm.
When you transitioned from, so you have a master's degree too, right?
I do, yep, in marine sciences.
Okay, and as I understand, you were working for Disney as a marine biologist.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like, and what spurred you transitioning into data science?
So yeah, I do have an undergrad degree and a master's degree, both in marine biology or marine sciences. So I've been doing research in the marine animal field for a number of years now. And I've always liked the idea of asking questions and studying different things and learning new things. And a lot of my work, and I honestly did not realize this until I was like almost 3.5 years into working as a professional marine biologist, that my day-to-day work almost entirely consisted of data analysis, data visualization, and data communication. And so I kind of took a hard look at my work and what I was doing and the parts of my job that I really enjoyed, and realized that I kind of, although my job title was marine biologist, I was really a data analyst who happened to be studying marine data. So I kind of made a decision to shift slightly. Marine biology is a fantastic field, but it's one where jobs are really, really limited. So for me, I needed to find something that was a little more stable and had a little bit more growth opportunity. And so data science seemed like a perfect transition of the things I was already doing, the things I enjoyed doing, and a field that had some growth opportunity to it.
Do you think there are a lot of scientists who are kind of in a similar boat? They've been working with data for a long time. It's a big part of their job, and they don't maybe realize how similar it is to working as a full-blown data scientist and just working with any data set that's not domain specific?
I think so. And honestly, I'm part of a meetup in Seattle called Seattle Data for Good, where it's basically a bunch of like data nerd type people who come in, and we're trying to do data projects for social good. And a lot of the people in that group, or at least more than a few, have a science background. There's a decent number of them that were biologists or, had a degree in biology or hard sciences and things like that. And they kind of came to the same realization that I did, that they were already doing a lot of data analysis. And so it kind of made sense to bridge the gap. So it's kind of interesting how that works out.
What have been some of the more surprising aspects of that transition from being a domain-specific scientist focusing on marine biology to focusing on just general data?
So I started using R when I was in grad school, And I thought I had a decent grasp of the basics for it. Like I'd been using it for years, mostly for very specific purposes, but I thought, that I had a pretty good understanding of how it all worked. And then I started looking at online classes just to refresh my memory and realized that I never actually got a really solid foundation in R programming. So even though I'd been using it for a long time, I had to kind of backtrack and fill in like the gaps in my knowledge that weren't important for me as a marine biologist necessarily. Like I didn't need to web scrape anything as a marine biologist. And, certain loops and stuff like that were useful, but others I never needed to know, at least for the work that I was doing. So I had to go back and sort of fill in those holes and things like that. But that's really it. Everything else, I could plug in any type of data for the type of analysis that I now know how to do. You obviously have to pick the right kind for the data that you're working with. So I think that's a skill as well, is knowing how to look at your data and knowing what type of analysis is appropriate. But yeah, I think that all just comes with practice.
We actually have quite a few scientists in our live audience.
Oh, awesome.
One gentleman is actually, he has an undergrad in biology, and he's strongly considering going into software, into data science.
Cool.
And then we have another who's still pursuing a marine science degree, working through FreeCodeCamp. So he's very interested in drone technology and ways of using drones to collect data. So those of you who are watching who are scientists specifically, if you have any questions for Amber, go ahead and start thinking of them and ask away. I can relay them to her. In the meantime, I want to talk about the success of your article. It was a profoundly successful article. It got picked up, as I said, by Mashable. I saw references to it in a lot of major publications. And it got, like, a lot of people were basically summarizing it and translating it into other languages to share these insights. Talk about what happened. What was that like for you to one day be, watching a bunch of movies and munging through a whole lot of data, and the next day to have this article up that was attracting all this attention?
It was actually really bizarre and totally surprising. So I did this article and I thought it might be sort of interesting for some other people who might like these movies, but I definitely did not expect all of the attention that the article ended up getting. And what was kind of interesting is shortly after I published it on Medium, my phone started buzzing like crazy because people were tweeting it. And every time they were tweeting it from Medium, it was like including me in the tweet. And so I was like, I've never received this many notifications from Twitter before in my life. Like, it was so strange. Every time I picked up my phone, it was like 20 new Twitter notifications. I was like, what's happening? Which was great. And a lot of people were commenting on the article, and some of them were just, commenting that they really liked it. Other people, had some concerns about methodology, and all of that was fantastic. And I was really excited to engage with those people. And I started by trying to, talk with those people as much as I could and respond to their comments. After a while, a lot of the comments started repeating. So I did end up writing like a follow-up article of frequently asked questions. But yeah, it was really cool. And then getting picked up by other publications, some of them emailed me because they wanted to ask specific questions. But others, like the Mashable one, I actually had no idea that was a thing. And I got a text from one of my friends who just texted me and said, "Congrats on Mashable." And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So it was really interesting. And that happened a couple times. Apparently people at IGN, like the video game website, had a video post about the article at one point that I didn't know about, and my dad found it and texted it to me and was like, I was looking at video game things and they were talking about you. It's just really bizarre but awesome. It's been really, really good and really interesting for me to have such a wide reach, I guess, and to interact with so many different types of people over something that I just did as a fun side project. Did
you get, so I know that currently, Amber, you're looking for a job in data visualization or
Mhm.
as a data scientist. Did you get any inquiries as a result of the article?
I did. A couple people sort of reached out to me, either for like freelance opportunities or just working with them on other sort of similar projects. And applying for jobs and reaching out to other people, this article and that sort of thing have been really good for me because I can point to something and say, this has gotten really good public feedback. And so as a data scientist or somebody who's making data visualizations, you need to be able to communicate your work to a wide variety of people. So having something to point to and say, here's this, data science thing that I worked on, and I wrote up, kind of like a how-to for it, but then I also wrote something that was, aimed more at a general audience for anybody who happens to like movies and be interested in this concept. All of those things are really good. I don't want to say resume builders, but good like experience to show people that you can do those sorts of things. So it's been an incredibly positive experience for my job hunting.
What advice would you have to somebody who's interested in data science and or data visualization and would similarly like to raise awareness of their skills and have an artifact they can point back to say like, hey, I know my stuff. Look at what I've done.
I think the biggest thing for me has been doing personal projects. So I had been working on a lot of online classes and things like that. And there's a lot of projects that they have you do for those classes so that you get used to working with your skills. But for me, I needed to know that I could like find a topic that I was personally interested in and do an entire project from start to finish, which I know for some like online courses is like a capstone project. But I just started doing them on my own. And so I would like find a data set and analyze it and make visualizations. And that has been so helpful for me because it helps me realize like where I have gaps in my knowledge and where I need to fill it in. And it's also unique. So if you're completing a class with, these online classes have thousands of people all taking the same class, and every single one of them has the same project that they come out with, they can all apply for the same job and point to the same project, which is good for employers. But, if you really want to make yourself stand out, I think these personal projects, at least for me, have been really pivotal to that, and having something unique and different to point to.
You said that you took a lot of online courses.
Mhm.
What specifically did you find helpful?
I've gone through quite a few. For working with R, a lot of the classes I've been taking have been on a website called DataCamp. And the reason that has been sort of pulling me is because it's an incredibly interactive medium. There's a lot of classes that you can take out there, and some of them are like lecture-based and others are project-based. And for me, I do really well when somebody says like, here's one little idea, try it and make sure you do it correctly before, moving on and you get really far down this rabbit hole. So for me, those sorts of really interactive courses have been really, really helpful. And then honestly, the rest of it I fill in as I go. If I'm working on a project like this one and I realize part of the way down the road that in order to continue, I need to know a certain skill, I kind of go backwards and find the class that I need to teach me that skill. So it kind of goes back and forth between classes that I specifically sought out before starting something and ones that I kind of reactively took once I realized I needed to know how to do something.
And one person, let me go ahead and get their name here.
Sure.
James Shackelford is asking whether you've had any trouble. Did you study math intensively as an undergrad and in grad school? Have you had to go back and learn any math?
So my undergraduate degree, I have a bachelor's of science, which for my school required that we take 2 levels of calculus and statistics. So I already had a background in, I guess, calculus and statistics, and I did take a course in graduate school that was kind of a general statistics class. It was called research methods, but it was focused on how to use R, and basically how to do statistical analysis within R. So I have a decent background in math. I've read a lot of people suggesting that you learn linear algebra, which is actually something I don't have a background in. And it's on my list of things to learn, but I have not run into an issue yet with like that lack of knowledge. That is not to say that I won't run into an issue with that, but that's kind of the only one that I'm lacking at this point, I think.
And your Twitter account says that you co-founded an organization called Unboxed Sci, like SCI.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, what's that all about? What do you all do there?
So that actually started when I was in grad school. You know, you as a graduate science student, you work on a thesis, and then when you're done, you write it in a paper that gets like published in hopefully a scientific journal and like stored away somewhere. And my project was looking at the way that baby seals were growing and developing when they were in a rehabilitation center. So, you know, they're growing up in these small pools and all of these things. And so the information that came out of my project was really applicable to people working in rehabilitation centers who don't really read a lot of scientific journals, because why would they? So I really wanted to make my research really easily accessible for people who would benefit from it. So I started going down this road of trying to figure out ways to communicate kind of complex scientific topics. And I started working with an animator and realized that making short animated movies that were like a minute to 2 minutes long was a really great way to communicate something that was complex. So we worked on one for my graduate thesis, and I got this insanely huge feedback from other scientists who either wanted to make something similar for their own work or wanted somebody to make it for them. So we sort of co-founded this this service that we call Unbox Science, and we help people take their really complex work and either turn it into you know, short videos or infographics or things like that to make it easier for people to understand, because it you know, science just gets locked away in these journals and they're covered in jargon and they're really difficult to understand unless you're in that very specific field. So yeah, so I work with that as well, and that's fun. It helps with my communication skills.
I can imagine, for sure. If our audience wanted to go and check out some of those videos, are they publicly available?
Yeah, you can find them on YouTube. I think we're youtube.com/unboxsci, SCI. And we also have a website. It's unbox.science.
Awesome. Well, I'll include those in the show notes.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and if anybody has feedback, we that project has kind of been on the back burner a little bit as I'm like career transitioning. But if anybody watching knows of anybody who would like some help in that area, definitely let us know.
Awesome. And just to close out, we have a lot of aspiring data scientists and data visualization practitioners in our audience. And I think a lot of them would be looking for maybe just a few quick words of advice, maybe some lessons learned along the way, things that might be able to save people a little bit of time in their journey.
I think, like I said, personal projects are so helpful. Like, don't shy away from doing personal projects. If you are going to do them, try to find something that you find personally interesting. Because if you find a data set and you're like, oh, I'm going to do a project on this, but you find it really boring, you're not going to finish it. Or at least it won't be as exciting for you when it's done. So try to find something that at least like you get excited about working on. I think another thing that's been helpful for me has been talking with other people. So getting feedback has been insanely helpful. So if you are an aspiring data scientist or data visualization person and want some feedback, you can always contact me. And I'd be happy to chat with you about it, even though I'm still learning too. But I think that's been really helpful, and reaching out to the community for help. When I really hit a wall, I go to things like Stack Overflow and ask, you know, the experts for some help. But trying to work through problems for a while before getting to that point is really, really good as well. So I think I think that would be my advice. Just keep pushing forward, try to do stuff that you like, and don't be afraid to ask other people for feedback or for help.
Amber, thank you so much for joining us and for your sage advice. I think
course.
it's applicable to many people, even people who are just learning to program and are building programming related projects, certainly for data science as well. Just to recapitulate what you said, keep going, ask questions, build things you're personally interested in so you can have the staying power to finish them out. Thank you again so much for joining us. I've included your Twitter handle in the notes below. Everybody follow Amber. She's really interesting. And we're all very excited to see what you build next.
Well, thanks for having me. This was exciting. And yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions or comments.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. Have a beautiful day.
Bye.